The words, "Without me, you're nothing," echoed in the hollow space that was once my home, then my heart. They were delivered with a casual cruelty that suggested not just a betrayal, but an absolute obliteration of my worth. That night, the world I had meticulously built, brick by fragile brick, didn't just crack, it imploded. The financial security I'd spent decades cultivating vanished with the stroke of a pen, twisted by deceit. My spiritual compass, once a steady guide, spun wildly, lost in a storm of doubt and recrimination. Every memory, every shared dream, every promise felt like a lie, a carefully constructed illusion designed to ensnare me. I remember standing amidst the wreckage, not knowing which way was up, or if there even was an up anymore. The silence after he left was heavier than any shout, a profound emptiness that seemed to swallow all sound, all light, all hope. I had been so sure of my path, so certain of my foundation, only to find it was built on shifting sand. The physical sensation was one of free fall, an endless plummet into an abyss of my own making. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? The emotional fallout was a relentless tide, pulling me further and further from the shore of sanity. Sleep became a battlefield of nightmares, and waking hours were no less cruel, filled with the ghosts of what was and what would never be again. My identity, so intertwined with my roles, partner, provider, stable presence, dissolved into a chaotic swirl of question marks. Who was I without those anchors? Without the person who had defined so much of my existence, albeit falsely? The mirror reflected a stranger, a gaunt, defeated version of myself I barely recognized, eyes clouded with a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. This was not merely a setback, it was an unmaking. It felt as though I was navigating a desolate wasteland, each step heavier than the last, my spirit bone-weary. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It felt like a betrayal of life itself, of the principles I held dear. Every plan I had for the future, every retirement dream, every legacy I hoped to build crumbled into dust. It wasn't just money. It was the years, the effort, the unwavering belief. The sense of being utterly exposed, vulnerable, and foolish was an unbearable weight. My strength had always been my resilience, my ability to bounce back. But this time, the spring felt broken. There was no bounce, only a dull, aching thud. And in that moment of absolute surrender to despair, a tiny, almost imperceptible whisper began to form in the deepest chambers of my soul. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it promised something more than the emptiness that surrounded me. It was a faint, distant echo of a truth I had once known. If you've ever felt this kind of crushing defeat, this absolute loss of self, you know the struggle is real. This journey isn't just my story. It's a testament to the human spirit and the divine grace that guides us through the darkest valleys. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's build a community of hope together. The initial shock gave way to a cold, pervasive numbness. Days blurred into weeks, marked only by the shifting shadows in my small, suddenly vast apartment. The vibrant colors of life had drained away, leaving a monochrome existence. I stopped answering calls, responding to texts, retreating into a shell of self-pity and shame. The weight of financial ruin was immense, a constant, gnawing anxiety that kept me awake at night and haunted my waking moments. Every expense, every choice became a calculated risk, a stark reminder of how far I had fallen. Groceries were chosen not for taste or desire, but for their ability to stretch the meager funds I had left. The familiar comforts of my previous life, the ability to give, to help, to simply not worry, were now luxuries I couldn't. The words echoed, a cruel crescendo in the silence of my shattered world. Without me, you're nothing. The voice of the one who had vowed loyalty, the one I had built a life with, now a viper's hiss. That night, the physical silence in my once vibrant home was deafening, but the clamor within my soul was louder still. Every memory, every shared dream, every promise seemed to ignite, then turn to ash, falling around me like silent, deadly snowflakes. I sat amidst the wreckage of what I thought was my future, the cold seeping into my bones, a mirror to the emptiness that had settled in my chest. What did it mean to be nothing? Was my identity so intertwined with another that their departure could truly erase me? The logical part of my mind screamed defiance, but my heart, bruised and bleeding, could only whimper in agreement. I felt stripped bare, not just of material possessions or financial security, but of the very essence of who I believed myself to be. The betrayal wasn't just an act, it was an amputation, severing me from a past I cherished and a future I had envisioned. The first few days were a blur of primal instinct. Eat, sleep, but mostly just breathe. Each breath was a conscious effort, a struggle against the suffocating weight of despair. I moved through the motions, a ghost in my own life, observing myself from a detached distance. Friends called, their voices filled with concern, their words of comfort barely penetrating the thick fog of grief. How could I explain that it wasn't just the loss of a relationship, but the profound erasure of self-worth that cut the deepest? The belief that I was inherently valuable, capable, and loved had been systematically dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. The financial ruin, a direct consequence of the betrayal, compounded the emotional trauma. Accounts emptied, investments vanished, debts accrued in my name. A cruel joke played on my trust. The practicalities were overwhelming, a constant reminder of how much had been taken, how little was left. I avoided mirrors, fearing the stranger who stared back, a woman I no longer recognized, haunted by the ghost of who she once was, and the chilling emptiness of who she now feared she might be. Sleep offered no true escape. Nightmares were a relentless replay of the final, cutting words, each iteration more vivid, more painful than the last. Sometimes, I'd wake in a cold sweat, reaching for a hand that wasn't there, a presence that had vanished. The quiet of the mornings was the hardest, a canvas for every fear and doubt to paint itself upon. I started to question every decision I had ever made, every judgment call, every moment of vulnerability. Was I naive, blind, foolish? The self-recrimination was a heavy burden, almost as crushing as the betrayal itself. There was a desperate ache to rewind time, to see the signs, to protect myself from the impending storm. But time, indifferent to human suffering, marched on, leaving me stranded in the aftermath. The vibrant colors of my world had faded to monochrome, and even the simple act of choosing what to wear felt like an insurmountable task, a decision too heavy for a soul so weary. The isolation became a self-imposed prison. I stopped answering calls, ignored texts, and found excuses to avoid any social interaction. The thought of feigning strength, of putting on a brave face, was exhausting. Better to retreat, to nurse my wounds in solitude, or so I told myself. Yet, the solitude itself was a double-edged sword, offering no distraction from the incessant chatter of my own anxieties. The silence amplified the accusations, the regrets, the fears of what lay ahead. Each day was a monumental effort, a slow, painful climb out of bed, a forced journey through the mundane tasks of survival. The simple joy I once found in small things, a warm cup of coffee, a sunrise, a familiar melody, had evaporated. My spirit felt like a parched desert, yearning for a single drop of life-giving water, but unsure where to even begin searching. It was in this profound state of desolation that I stumbled upon an old, dust-laden Bible on a forgotten shelf. I hadn't opened it in years, perhaps decades. My childhood faith, once a comforting presence, had slowly eroded under the weight of adult life and its relentless demands. Now, as I traced the worn pages, a flicker of something unfamiliar sparked within me. It wasn't hope, not yet, but a faint curiosity. Could there be answers here, in these ancient words, for a modern pain so raw and immediate? The idea felt almost absurd, a relic from a simpler time. Yet the sheer depth of my despair urged me to consider anything, however improbable. I didn't know what I was looking for, or even how to begin, but the heavy weight of the book in my hands offered a strange, unexpected comfort, a tangible link to something beyond my immediate suffering. I started reading, not with devotion, but with a desperate hunger for distraction, for anything that could pull me out of my spiraling thoughts. I began in Genesis, finding stories of beginnings, of creation, of dramatic falls and improbable rises. There was a strange comfort in reading about human frailty, about betrayals and losses, even in those biblical narratives. It wasn't just my story. It was the story of humanity, repeated through generations. The world hadn't ended for them, despite their mistakes and their suffering. But the real shift began when I reached the Psalms. David's cries of anguish, his laments of betrayal and abandonment, resonated deep within my own soul. It was as if someone had articulated the very torment I felt, giving voice to the inexpressible. I wasn't alone in my pain, even if those around me couldn't fully grasp it. These ancient verses offered not solutions, but companionship in sorrow. The verses didn't offer immediate solutions to my financial woes or magically erase the pain of betrayal, but they offered something more profound, a sense of being understood. My God, why have you forsaken me?" These words, spoken by countless suffering souls and even by Christ himself, became my own silent prayer. I allowed myself to feel the raw emotion, to cry out to a God I wasn't even sure was listening, but to whom I felt an inexplicable urge to speak. This wasn't a sophisticated theological journey. It was a desperate, guttural cry from the depths of a broken heart. And in that raw, unfiltered vulnerability, something shifted. A tiny crack appeared in the wall of ice around my heart, allowing a sliver of warmth, a faint breath of air, to penetrate. It was the beginning of a conversation, not just with God, but with myself about what truly mattered. This conversation, however hesitant, spurred me to take the first practical steps. The legal papers, ignored for weeks, now lay before me. Each document was a painful reminder of what had been lost, but also a stark confrontation with the reality of my situation. I couldn't rebuild if I didn't acknowledge the extent of the damage. I called the first lawyer, my voice trembling but steady. I contacted creditors, explaining my predicament with a newfound resolve that surprised even myself. It wasn't courage in the grand sense, but a quiet determination, fueled by the slow burning ember of faith that had begun to glow within me. I was reclaiming agency, one difficult phone call, one daunting form at a time. The process was excruciatingly slow, filled with setbacks and frustrations, but each small act of moving forward chipped away at the immense burden of helplessness. The lawyer painted a bleak picture. Years of financial entanglement, hidden debts, and legal complexities loomed like an impassable mountain range. "It's going to be a long and difficult fight," she warned, her expression grim. My heart sank, but this time, it didn't. The silence in the empty house was a different kind of deafening now. It wasn't just the absence of his voice, but the echo of my own broken dreams bouncing off the walls. I sat amidst the packed boxes, remnants of a life that felt alien, questioning every choice, every belief I'd ever held. The shame was a heavy cloak, suffocating me, whispering that the words, "Without me, you're nothing," were not a lie, but a brutal truth. My spirit felt like dry, cracked earth, utterly barren. There was no solace in sleep, only restless nights punctuated by replays of his cold gaze and the finality of his departure. My phone lay untouched, the world outside feeling too vibrant, too demanding for a soul as bruised as mine. Food tasted like ash. I had lost not just a partner, but my sense of purpose, my financial stability, and most profoundly, my trust in myself to discern good from bad. Yet even in that deep abyss, as I stared at a dusty Bible I hadn't opened in years, a peculiar thought surfaced. It wasn't a profound revelation, just a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something beyond this immediate, crushing reality. It was a thought so fragile, it could have been merely the wind outside, but it settled in my heart, a tiny seed in parched ground, suggesting that this wasn't the absolute end. That fragile thought, barely a wisp, was the first breath of air in what felt like an emotional vacuum. I didn't open the Bible that night, but its presence on the shelf, untouched for so long, became a focal point. It was a silent witness to my unraveling, and now, perhaps, a silent promise. Days bled into weeks, each one a struggle to put one foot in front of the other. The mundane tasks, brushing my teeth, making a cup of tea, felt like monumental achievements. Friends called, their well-meaning advice often ringing hollow, their sympathy a gentle reminder of my visible brokenness. I appreciated their kindness, but I wasn't ready to articulate the depth of my despair, nor the emerging, unspoken question that haunted me. What if there was another way? One afternoon, driven by an impulse I didn't understand, I picked up the old Bible. It fell open to a random page, and my eyes landed on words that seemed to leap off the page. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. It wasn't an immediate fix, no lightning bolt of enlightenment, but it was a crack in the wall of my solitude, a direct address to my deepest pain. This wasn't a self-help book. It felt like a voice speaking directly to the core of my shattered self, offering a glimpse of a different kind of healing, one I hadn't even known to seek. The verse was a tiny anchor, holding me steady in a sea of emotional turmoil. I reread it countless times, not intellectualizing it, but allowing the words to wash over me. It felt less like a promise and more like an acknowledgement that my pain was seen, that it had a name, and that there was a capacity for healing, even if I couldn't yet imagine what that looked like. Slowly, haltingly, I began to explore. My exploration wasn't structured or academic. It was driven by an intuitive pull, a desperate need for something to cling to. I started reading other passages, finding stories of people who had faced immense loss, betrayal, and despair, yet somehow found their way through. Their journeys weren't always linear or easy, but they shared a common thread, an eventual reliance on something greater than themselves. This wasn't the self-made, pull-yourself-up-by-your-bootstraps narrative I had always subscribed to. This was different. It suggested that sometimes the greatest strength came from admitting utter weakness, from surrendering control when you had none left anyway. This was a profound shift for someone who had always prided herself on independence and competence, a new perspective that began to challenge the very foundations of my identity. Surrender was a concept I'd always viewed as defeat, a sign of giving up, but in my current state, with everything gone, it began to feel like the only viable path forward. What more was there to lose? The financial wreckage was still a daily anxiety, the legal entanglements a constant headache, but these external pressures, while real, started to feel secondary to the internal landscape I was navigating. My focus shifted from, how can I fix this, to what am I meant to learn from this? The change in perspective was subtle but profound. I began to spend time each morning in quiet reflection, not praying elaborate prayers, but simply sitting with my thoughts, allowing feelings of pain, anger, and sorrow to surface without judgment. I called it my truth-telling hour, an hour dedicated to acknowledging the raw, unfiltered truth of my emotional state before God, or whatever higher power I was beginning to believe might exist. This ritual became my sanctuary, a small pocket of peace in the midst of chaos, where the words, "Without me, you're nothing," slowly began to lose their power, replaced by a growing awareness that perhaps I was never truly alone, even when I felt most abandoned. The sanctuary of my quiet mornings was vital, but life outside its confines remained harsh. Bills piled up, the betrayal still stung, and the sheer effort of rebuilding felt insurmountable some days. There were moments when doubt would creep in, whispering that this newfound spiritual exploration was just a coping mechanism, a deluded escape from reality. I questioned if I was simply replacing one form of dependence with another, exchanging reliance on a flawed human for an invisible divine. The intellectual arguments against faith were strong in my mind, honed over years of a self-sufficient life. Yet, something kept drawing me back. It wasn't the promise of immediate answers or sudden material wealth. It was the quiet resilience I felt growing within me, the ability to face another day with a flicker of hope I hadn't possessed before. This wasn't about denying the pain. It was about finding a way to carry it without being crushed by it. I started reaching out to others who had shared similar stories of loss and rebirth, finding solace in their testimonies, realizing that my brokenness was not unique, and neither was the path to healing, which often began with a courageous step into the unknown. Connecting with others who had walked similar paths proved to be a balm for my wounded soul. Hearing their stories, their struggles, and ultimately their triumphs created a tapestry of shared human experience that made me feel less isolated. They spoke of hitting rock bottom, of the shame and despair, but also of a turning point, often spiritual, that catalyzed their recovery. Their honesty was refreshing, devoid of platitudes, and rich with the wisdom of lived experience. One woman, a survivor of a devastating financial fraud by a family member, described her initial bitterness as a prison, and how forgiveness, not for the perpetrator, but for her own peace, slowly set her free. Her words resonated deeply, challenging my entrenched desire for retribution and justice. It wasn't about letting my betrayer off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the emotional chains that his actions had forged around my heart. This was a radical idea, a concept that required me to shed old notions of justice and embrace a more profound, albeit difficult, form of healing. The seed of forgiveness, however tiny, began to germinate in the barren soil of my heart, promising a different kind of growth. The idea of forgiveness, initially a bitter pill, slowly began to transform into a pathway to liberation. It wasn't a sudden grand gesture, but a conscious decision made daily, sometimes hourly, to release the grip of anger and resentment that was consuming me. This journey required immense courage, pushing against every instinct that screamed for vengeance or continued bitterness. It was during this period of intense internal struggle, where I wrestled with the concept of unconditional love and grace, that I felt a profound shift. I understood that my healing wasn't dependent on his repentance or recognition of his wrongdoings, but solely on my choice to break free. This realization wasn't merely intellectual, it was deeply spiritual, a moment where the "without me, you're nothing" mantra finally shattered, replaced by an awareness of an enduring, internal strength that came from something far greater than any human relationship. It was a commitment to my own spiritual rebirth, a definitive turning point where I consciously chose faith over bitterness, hope over despair, and began to actively build a new foundation, brick by painful brick. If this journey of faith and renewal resonates with you, I encourage you to join our community. Your story is important, and together we can find strength and encouragement. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a space where everyone feels seen and supported. With that commitment solidified, my actions began to change. I wasn't just reading the Bible, I was living its principles, however imperfectly. The financial pressures remained, but I tackled them with a newfound clarity and resilience. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I approached each challenge as an opportunity to trust. I sought out new, humble work opportunities that aligned with my values, no longer chasing the prestige or material comforts that had once defined my perception of success. It was a stark contrast to my previous life, a deliberate stripping away of superficial layers. I learned to live with less, to find joy in simplicity, and to appreciate the small victories: a successful budget, a kind word from a colleague, a peaceful evening walk. This period wasn't without its difficulties. There were still days when the weight of the past threatened to drag me down. But now, I had a source of strength that transcended my own limited capabilities. I was learning to lean on a wisdom far greater than my own, trusting that even in these small, often mundane steps, I was being guided towards something profound and meaningful. This period of living with less taught me invaluable lessons about true abundance. I realized that my previous definition of success had been heavily influenced by external validation and material possessions, both of which had been cruelly stripped away. Now I found richness in moments of quiet contemplation, in genuine connections with others, and in the simple act of gratitude for basic needs being met. The betrayal had forced me to confront the fragility of all earthly things, making me appreciate the enduring nature of spiritual truth. I started volunteering at a local community center, offering my administrative skills where they were needed. The work was unpaid, but the sense of purpose and the genuine smiles of the people I helped filled a void that material possessions never could. This wasn't charity, it was connection, a way to pour my energy into something positive, to actively participate in healing not just myself, but the world around me, however small my contribution. This selfless act, born from a desire to serve, became a powerful conduit for my own spiritual growth, showing me that giving was indeed receiving in ways I had never truly understood before. The act of giving, of pouring myself into serving others, began to reshape my understanding of myself. The woman who had felt nothing after the betrayal was slowly rediscovering her inherent worth, not through accomplishments or relationships, but through the simple act of being useful and compassionate. The bitterness that had once defined my emotional landscape began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of peace and a burgeoning joy. It wasn't an exuberant, superficial happiness, but a deep-seated contentment that came from living authentically and in alignment with my rediscovered faith. I found myself smiling more, genuinely engaging in conversations and approaching challenges with a calm determination instead of a sense of dread. People around me started to notice the change. They commented on a new light in my eyes, a serene quality they hadn't seen before. I didn't preach to them, but I shared my journey openly when asked, speaking of the incredible power of surrender and the unexpected grace that had met me in my darkest hour. My story, once a testament to loss, was slowly becoming a testament to resilience and the transformative power of spiritual rebirth. Sharing my story, initially daunting, became a source of further strength. Each time I articulated the raw pain of the betrayal and the subsequent journey of faith, it solidified my own understanding and conviction. It wasn't about seeking sympathy, it was about offering hope, about demonstrating that even from the ashes of utter devastation, new life could emerge. My vulnerability became a bridge to connect with others who were silently struggling, creating a community of shared experience and mutual encouragement. I remember one conversation in particular with a woman who had endured a similar professional betrayal. Her eyes, initially downcast, slowly lifted as I spoke, a flicker of recognition in their depths. She told me she had felt utterly alone, convinced she was the only one to ever experience such a profound loss of trust. My narrative, her words revealed, offered her a lifeline, a glimpse of a path forward she hadn't dared to imagine. This wasn't about me. It was about the universal human need for connection, for stories that illuminate pathways out of darkness, showing us that even when our world collapses, a greater hand is often at work, guiding us towards an unexpected and more meaningful existence. The idea of a greater hand at work became more than just a comforting thought. It was an observable reality in my daily life. Opportunities began to appear that seemed divinely orchestrated. A chance encounter led to a part-time remote job that perfectly leveraged my skills while allowing me the flexibility to continue my volunteer work and spiritual practices. It wasn't a return to my former financial status, but it was stability, dignity, and a sense of progress. The doors that had slammed shut on my old life weren't just closed. They had been replaced by new, unexpected openings. These weren't grand, miraculous interventions as depicted in movies, but subtle, perfectly timed convergences of circumstances that affirmed my newfound trust. Each small provision, each timely connection, reinforced the message I was slowly internalizing, that I was cared for, guided, and that my life had purpose far beyond the boundaries of my own making. The narrative of "without me, you're nothing" was completely dismantled, replaced by a deep-seated conviction that I was always, inherently, something precious, something valued, something guided. This profound shift in my self-perception was the true miracle. No longer was my worth tied to external factors, to a relationship, a job, or a bank account. It was an intrinsic value, bestowed by a power far greater than any human being. The sting of the betrayal, while still a memory, no longer held power over my emotional state. It had become a catalyst, a painful but ultimately necessary turning point that redirected my entire life's trajectory. I looked back at the person I was before the betrayal, driven, perhaps a little too arrogant in my self-sufficiency, and certainly naive in my trust, and saw a different kind of strength now. It wasn't the strength of never falling, but the strength of rising again, not by my own might alone, but by allowing myself to be carried when I couldn't stand. The emptiness I had once felt after hearing, "Without me, you're nothing," was now filled with a quiet confidence and a sense of enduring peace. I understood that true empowerment didn't come from dominating circumstances, but from trusting a benevolent force even when circumstances felt overwhelming. And this realization truly transformed me. My transformation wasn't a static destination, but an ongoing journey. There were still moments of doubt, days when the old fears tried to creep back in, but now I had tools, practices. The small sewing machine hummed a constant, reassuring rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of her past life. Each stitch was an act of faith, a tiny thread weaving together not just fabric, but a future she was painstakingly constructing from the ruins. Orders for custom blankets and simple repairs trickled in, enough to cover the most basic expenses. But the climb out of debt felt like an Everest expedition. There were nights she'd sit, fingers raw, staring at the meager earnings, a cold dread seeping in. Was this truly it? Was this tiny, fragile venture all that remained of a life once filled with abundance, now reduced to this desperate struggle? The whispers of self-doubt were insidious, mimicking the very words that once condemned her. Without me, you're nothing. She'd close her eyes, picturing the vast emptiness of her bank account, the hollow echo of a broken promise, and the physical ache in her tired bones. Yet, deep down, a flicker persisted. It wasn't logic or a guarantee of success, but in stubborn, almost irrational belief that this effort, however small, was a testament to something more profound than mere survival. This wasn't about getting rich. It was about reclaiming her worth, one stitch at a time. And sometimes, in the quiet hum of the machine, she could almost hear a different voice, softer, urging her onward, reminding her that small beginnings often concealed vast possibilities. Just as a tentative stability began to settle, a new challenge emerged from an unexpected quarter. The local fabric supplier, her sole source for affordable materials, announced a sudden, substantial price hike, citing global supply chain issues. It was a blow that threatened to derail everything. Her profit margins were already razor-thin. An increase like this would make her custom orders unfeasible, forcing her to raise prices and potentially lose her small but loyal customer base. Panic flared, hot and sharp. This felt like a deliberate test, a cosmic joke after all she had endured. She spent sleepless nights researching alternative suppliers, only to find prices even higher, or minimum order quantities she couldn't possibly meet. The weight of it, the silence of the old workshop, once a place of dust and forgotten dreams, had slowly begun to fill with the quiet hum of purpose. Every sand, every paint stroke, every careful alignment of wood felt like a prayer, a tangible act of faith. It wasn't about grand gestures or immediate riches. It was about the dignity of honest work, the profound satisfaction of creating something beautiful from nothing but raw material and a rekindled spirit. The little capital she'd managed to scrape together, through selling a few old trinkets and offering her nascent skills to neighbors, was reinvested carefully, almost reverently. Each penny was stretched, each decision weighed, not just for financial viability, but for its alignment with the deeper sense of calling that had begun to blossom in her heart. She wasn't just building furniture, she was building resilience, piece by painstaking piece. There were days, of course, when the weariness threatened to overshadow the hope. The ache in her hands, the late nights spent hunched over blueprints sketched on recycled paper, the relentless cycle of marketing her nascent creations through word of mouth and tentative social media posts. The world hadn't suddenly become a magical place where every effort was instantly rewarded. The shadows of past doubts, of the cruel words that had defined her worth for so long, occasionally flickered at the edges of her consciousness. But now, when those doubts arose, they met not an empty void of despair, but a quiet, unwavering conviction. She had learned to distinguish between external noise and the steady voice within, the one that reminded her of her inherent value, a value not contingent on another's validation or even worldly success. She was finding her footing, not just in business, but in herself, discovering a strength she never knew she possessed, forged in the fires of adversity. This new foundation, built not on sand, but on something far more enduring, was preparing her for the gentle winds of change that were slowly but surely beginning to stir. The first custom order felt like a monumental achievement, a tiny but tangible affirmation that her work was not only valued, but desired. It was a simple coffee table, yet in its creation she poured not just skill, but a narrative of hope. The customer, a kindly older woman, had heard about her through a local community group she'd joined, a chance encounter that felt divinely orchestrated. As the pieces came together, she found herself not just following instructions, but infusing the wood with a quiet strength, a subtle elegance that spoke volumes. The satisfaction wasn't merely from the payment, which barely covered materials and a modest hourly rate, but from seeing the joy in the woman's eyes upon delivery. It was more than a transaction. It was a connection, a seed of trust planted in the fertile ground of her new beginning. This positive feedback, this genuine appreciation, fueled her more than any profit margin ever could. Word began to spread, slowly at first, like ripples in a calm pond. Neighbors who had initially offered pity now offered genuine admiration. Small commissions for custom shelves, repaired antique chairs, and unique decorative pieces began to trickle in. Her small workshop, once a symbol of her retreat from the world, was becoming a hub of quiet creativity. She meticulously documented each project, not just for herself, but to create a portfolio, a visual testament to her evolving craft. It was during these quiet moments, sanding down a rough edge or choosing the perfect stain, that she often felt a profound sense of gratitude. The betrayal, the deep cuts of the past, had forced her to look inward, to rediscover talents and passions that had long been dormant under the weight of someone else's expectations. This work wasn't just a livelihood, it was a form of self-expression, a conversation with the divine, a way of proving to herself and to the universe that her spirit was unbroken. Each completed piece wasn't just furniture, it was a testament to her ongoing, quiet revolution. Just as momentum seemed to build, a new challenge emerged, subtle but persistent. A sudden surge in the cost of quality timber threatened to erode her already thin margins, making it difficult to price her work competitively without sacrificing the quality she was so committed to. This wasn't a personal betrayal, but an economic reality that felt like a fresh test of her resolve. Should she compromise on materials, risk her reputation, or raise prices, and potentially lose the new customers she was just beginning to attract? The old fear of scarcity, of not being enough, whispered its familiar tune. For a moment, the weight of the market felt as crushing as the weight of the past. She spent restless nights poring over invoices, searching for alternative suppliers, trying to find a loophole in a system that seemed designed to squeeze out small, independent artisans. The temptation to despair was real, to see this as a sign that her dreams were too fragile, too impractical for the harsh realities of the world. But something had shifted deep within her. The old self might have retreated, given up, seen this as definitive proof of her inadequacy. The new self, forged in the crucible of loss and reborn through faith, approached it differently. Instead of paralysis, there was a surge of innovative thinking. She began to explore reclaimed wood, salvaging forgotten pieces from old barns, discarded furniture, and even construction sites. It was harder work, requiring more time for preparation and restoration, but it offered a unique character to her pieces, a story embedded in every grain. This pivot wasn't just a business strategy, it was an act of defiant creativity, a refusal to be limited by circumstance. It was a testament to the belief that even when conventional paths closed, new, often more beautiful, avenues could open, if only one had the courage to seek them. The decision to work with reclaimed wood, born out of necessity, soon became her signature. What started as a cost-saving measure transformed into a unique selling proposition. Each knot, each weathered imperfection, each subtle discoloration in the salvaged timber told a story, adding a depth and character that new wood simply couldn't replicate. Customers, initially drawn to her craftsmanship, were now captivated by the narrative behind her materials, appreciating the sustainability and the artistry involved in giving forgotten wood a second life. Her pieces weren't just functional, they were conversation starters, imbued with history and a palpable sense of resilience. She found herself learning new techniques for restoration, for blending old and new, for highlighting the inherent beauty of aged wood. This creative exploration revitalized her spirit, turning what had felt like a limitation into an expansive new frontier. Unexpectedly, this shift also led her to new connections. While sourcing materials, she met other artisans, craftsmen, and even environmentalists who shared her passion for sustainability and upcycling. A local artist, charmed by her dedication, offered to feature her work in a small, independent gallery, providing invaluable exposure. A carpenter from a neighboring town, impressed by her resourcefulness, shared tips on sourcing and preparation. These were not the grand, dramatic interventions she might have once imagined, but quiet, steady streams of support flowing from unexpected wells. Each new connection, each shared piece of wisdom, felt like a gentle affirmation, a subtle sign that she was on the right path. It was as if the universe, having tested her resolve, was now beginning to conspire in her favor, providing exactly what she needed, exactly when she needed it, confirming that her faith was indeed being rewarded. The small gallery showing was a quiet success, bringing in a new wave of inquiries and genuine interest. People were not just buying furniture, they were buying into her story, into the ethos of renewal and resilience that her pieces embodied. She found herself sharing her journey more openly, speaking about the transformative power of starting over, about finding beauty in the brokenness, and about the unexpected paths that emerge when one truly surrenders and trusts. It was vulnerable, but also incredibly liberating. Each conversation, each shared experience deepened her understanding that her story, while deeply personal, was also universally resonant. She wasn't just an artisan, she was becoming a voice, a testament to the power of faith, to rebuild not just a life, but an identity. One evening, while working late, meticulously sanding a vintage dresser she was repurposing, she paused. The scent of sawdust, the quiet hum of the workshop, the faint glow of the lamp illuminating her careful work, it all felt profoundly peaceful. There was no longer the frantic energy of survival, but the steady rhythm of purpose. She thought back to the words that had once crushed her. "Without me, you're nothing." The irony was now stark, almost amusing. In losing everything associated with that person, she had found herself. She was not only something, she was creating something beautiful, meaningful, and enduring, far beyond anything she could have imagined in the shadow of that past relationship. This wasn't about proving a point to her betrayer, it was about proving a truth to herself and to God. That her worth was inherent, not derived, and that true strength lay in the courage to rebuild with integrity and faith. This quiet realization wasn't a sudden epiphany, but the culmination of countless small victories and persistent efforts. It was the understanding that the pain of betrayal had served a purpose, however brutal it felt at the time. It had stripped away illusions, forced her to confront her own vulnerabilities, and ultimately led her to a faith that was not a crutch, but an unwavering anchor. Her work, her small business, her growing community of supportive individuals, these were not just outcomes, they were manifestations of her internal transformation. She no longer sought external validation. She found it within, in the quiet strength of her spirit, and the palpable presence of divine guidance. The workshop, once a refuge from a shattered world, had become a sanctuary of self-discovery, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and spiritual resilience. She began to host small workshops herself, teaching others the art of repurposing, sharing not just technical skills, but also the philosophy of finding new purpose in old things. These gatherings became more than craft sessions. They were therapeutic spaces where people shared their own stories of loss and renewal, finding camaraderie and inspiration. It was during one of these workshops, watching a hesitant participant transform a discarded piece of wood into something lovely, that the full weight of her journey truly hit her. Her own story had moved beyond mere survival. It had become a source of hope for others. The path had been arduous, marked by profound sorrow and daunting challenges, but every step had led her to this moment of profound peace and genuine purpose. She recognized that the greater path God had promised wasn't necessarily one of grand fame or fortune, but one of deep, abiding fulfillment and the ability to touch other lives. The peace that settled upon her was not an absence of problems, but an inner stillness that allowed her to navigate them with grace. There were still late nights, still challenging projects, still moments of doubt, but they no longer held the power to unravel her. She had built a life rooted in authenticity, a business founded on passion, and a spirit anchored in unwavering faith. Her finances, though not opulent, were stable, providing a sense of security she hadn't known even in her previous, more externally prosperous life. This was not just about money, it was about independence, about the ability to chart her own course, free from the manipulative control of others. She had proven to herself that her worth was intrinsic, her capabilities boundless, and her spirit unbreakable. The freedom tasted sweeter than any success she might have achieved in her old life, a freedom earned through fire and forged in faith. The contrast between her past and present was a constant, gentle reminder of how far she had come. The constant striving for external approval, the fear of judgment, the sense of walking on eggshells, all those anxieties had dissipated, replaced by a calm assurance, a quiet confidence that resonated in her voice, in her posture, in the unwavering gaze she now held. She recognized that the greatest gift of her journey wasn't the material things she had rebuilt, but the person she had become. The woman who had been told she was nothing was now a woman of substance, of quiet power, and of profound faith. This profound internal shift was her true wealth, a treasure no one could ever take from her, a testament to the transforming power of a God who truly opens greater paths. Reflecting on the entirety of her journey, from the shattering betrayal to this moment of quiet triumph, she saw a mosaic of divine orchestration. Every closed door, every painful farewell, every moment of despair had been a crucial step in a divinely guided process of stripping away what was unnecessary, what was false, to reveal the true essence of who she was meant to be. The betrayal that had once felt like an ending had, in fact, been the most profound beginning. It had been the catalyst that pushed her off a path of dependency and into a wilderness where she truly had to learn to rely on God alone. And in that reliance, she discovered not just survival, but an abundance of spirit, creativity, and purpose that had been hidden beneath layers of someone else's definition of her. She had been pruned, and though the cutting was painful, the fruit that had grown was richer, sweeter, and more resilient than she could have ever imagined. Her life was now a living testament to the truth that God doesn't just close doors. He masterfully redirects, He lovingly refines, and He ultimately opens vistas of opportunity and fulfillment that are far grander than any we could conceive on our own. The past, with all its pain, was no longer a shadow to escape, but a foundational chapter in her powerful story of rebirth. It became clear that the very forces meant to diminish her had instead been used as instruments of her elevation. She had rebuilt not from scratch, but from a stronger, deeper, more authentic foundation. She now lived not just for herself, but as an embodiment of hope for others who might find themselves lost in the ruins of their own broken dreams. Her story resonated deeply with those who heard it, offering a beacon of hope in a world often overshadowed by despair. She often shared her journey, not to boast of her resilience, but to illuminate the path for others, to show that even in the darkest valleys, there is a way forward, a light to be found. The message she carried wasn't one of quick fixes or superficial optimism, but of profound trust in a process that, while painful, ultimately leads to unparalleled growth and spiritual awakening. She became a living example that when one door slams shut with a resounding finality, it's not an end, but an invitation to trust, to surrender, and to embrace the unknown with an open heart. The nothing she was told she would become had transformed into everything she was meant to be, a person filled with purpose, peace, and an unwavering faith. This journey, far from being just her own, became a shared narrative of triumph, a testament to the universal human spirit and the unwavering love of God. The peace that now permeated her life was a tangible reflection of a spirit healed and made whole. She understood that life's true treasures are not found in external possessions or relationships, but in the internal fortitude, the character forged in fire, and the unwavering connection to a higher power. Her life had become a vibrant tapestry, woven with threads of struggle, courage, and ultimate redemption, a masterpiece crafted by hands both human and divine. It was a story that needed to be heard, a living sermon preached not with words alone, but with every breath she took, every piece she crafted, every life she touched. And so, her life evolved into a beautiful continuum of giving back, of sharing the lessons learned, and of embodying the message that had become her truth. The workshop thrived, not just as a business, but as a place of inspiration, a tangible representation of new beginnings. Her days were filled with meaningful work, genuine connections, and the quiet joy of knowing she was living a life aligned with her true purpose. The bitter taste of betrayal had long faded, replaced by the sweet savor of redemption and an enduring sense of gratitude. She had not only survived the storm, she had learned to sail. She had not only rebuilt her life, she had transformed it into a vessel for grace and a testament to unwavering faith. Her story stands as a beacon, reminding us all that even when someone tries to tell you you're nothing without them, God is simply closing a door to open an even greater path, one filled with unforeseen blessings and profound personal growth. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or reminded you of your own strength, please consider leaving a like and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And for more stories of spiritual rebirth and unwavering faith, subscribe to our channel to join our community. Your journey is just beginning, and God is already making a way for you.